If the Bible's got you tied in knots, if you're burdened with religious thoughts, come grab a drink and join the choir. It's Heretic Happy Hour.
Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to yet another amazing episode of the Heretic Happy Hour podcast. I am one of your three hosts. I'm Keith Giles. I'm the author of several books, including the upcoming book, Jesus Undefeated, Condemning the False Doctrine of Eternal Torment. Yeah, baby. Coming out on my birthday.
Heresy.
That's right. Full on heresy. Coming to you November 9th, my birthday. Available available wherever heretical books are sold. And I am joined by my friends and co-hosts Matt and Jamal. Hey guys, say howdy.
Hi friends, this is Jamal. I am alive today, and obviously, but I am also the author of Living for a Living most recently, and it's really, really good to be back on the Heretic Happy Hour podcast with you guys.
And I don't want to steal your guys' thunder, but I also have a book, and it just came out. Well, I got 5 books, but I got a new book. This is Matt, by the way. I'm sure y'all know. It's called Devoted as Fuck, and so I apologize for the title, but I don't really. I don't really apologize. I don't really. I'm just saying that. But yeah, go pick that up on Amazon. That's the best place to get it. You're not going to get it at Christian bookstores or Lifeway or none of that.
Well, yeah,
but you can get it on Amazon.
Lifeway's out of business, I think. Didn't they go out of business? I think they shut their doors.
Okay, well then you're not getting shit.
That's
at Lifeway,
right.
So.
Well, oh, by the way, I probably should mention that the Heretic Happy Hour podcast. We're in a series. We've been doing a series recently, and this series is called Culture Wars. So we're going to be talking about topics that are related to the culture. And this one's going to be an awesome one. I'm looking forward to this episode here.
Yes, guys. And I wanted to just let the listeners know that I've been promoted to the manager of the hotline for our podcast.
Congrats.
And
way to go.
You've earned it. You've earned
have,
it. Man.
You fought really hard. And I thought your proposal that you made in the break room, that day with the PowerPoint was really strong. And
thank you.
Yeah. So good job. Good job.
Yeah, I think I sold the board on it.
Did.
And here I am. I have made it. Thanks, Mom. Here, Mom, I'm here. So the number is 240-343-7379. Again, it's 240-343-7379. And I believe we have a gift for everybody today because we have a voicemail that came into the hotline. Can we cue that up?
What's up, shithead? I'm just kidding. This is Matt from Fayetteville, Arkansas. And I have a question regarding something that's just been bothering me for a little while. In my Christian walk, whatever you want to call it, a lot of people refer to Jesus whenever he says, "You will do greater things than these." My question about this, something that's kind of blown my mind, is do you think that maybe Jesus was talking about you'll do greater things than anything that's previously been recorded that Jesus did? Specifically speaking, the entire history of the Bible and anything that basically led up to prophecies that Jesus fulfilled. So do you think that Jesus made a very simple statement by saying, you'll do greater things than these, but actually meant something profound by saying, you'll actually do greater things than anything that I've done and anything that has been recorded in the Bible? I would love to hear your thoughts. Would love to hear what you have to say. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Well, hey there.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's it. And he's referring to John's gospel, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
John 14
something. Well, I have a very strong opinion on that verse. So I don't know if you guys want me to go first or last.
Go for it.
Yeah, I have a strong opinion too. You go first.
Okay,
go
so
for it,
this is one of my pet peeves. I really hate when Christians will say that, like, "Oh, Jesus said you do greater things," and that's supposed to mean that well, Jesus walked on water. That means we should float in the air, fly into space, and or whatever. Jesus healed the sick, so that we should be able to heal. Or Jesus fed thousands, we should be able to feed millions. With a snap of our fingers or something. And I don't think that's at all what Jesus meant. And I think it's easily provable by the fact that the disciples didn't understand it that way, and they didn't. Immediately after Jesus, they weren't running around doing greater miracles and doing these greater things. So I think that's a misunderstanding of what he means when he says that you'll do greater things. And actually, again, it's one of those pet peeves of mine where it go to the actual passage and read what is actually said. And what he actually says is, he says that if you love me and if you follow me, he says, you will do the things I have been doing. That's the first part of it. So the assumption Jesus has is that you'll start off by following me. That's what it means to be a disciple. And you'll do the things I've been doing, which I think is very simply preaching the good news of the kingdom, caring for the poor, caring for the hungry, in very practical ways. And then he says, and then you'll do greater things. So I think we always want to jump straight to the greater things, but we don't want to do the simple things that Jesus did, beyond the greater things. And again, I don't think greater things means greater miracles necessarily. I think actually it really just means in a very practical way. Jesus was one guy. But now, if we fast forward today, almost 2,000 years after Jesus said that, the Spirit of Christ is indwelling millions of people all over the planet. And so every single one of us, every single hour of every single day are capable of doing exponentially more than one guy in one place could do geographically. So, but again, I think a lot of those works that Jesus is talking about, are just simply the things that he told us to do in the Sermon on the Mount, right? Love one another, love your neighbors yourself, love your enemy, bless those who curse you, overcome evil with good and those kinds of things. So I think that's what Jesus is talking about. That's my take on it.
Yeah. Jamal, you got some thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I love when Jesus said that, because Jesus is actually, I believe, so first of all, I think Christianity totally misunderstands this, the Christian religion, because there's no way you can actually believe that we'll do greater things if you understand that Jesus is exclusively the Son of God and we're not the children of God. So that, his statement that we'll do greater things really is a beautiful way of saying, hey guys, I am nobody. I'm not somebody that's inherently different than you. Actually, you're going to go on and do greater things. You're going to carry this further. And I love it because, again, it does challenge the Christian mind. To the Christian, here's that. They're like, oh, that's hyperbole. Oh, that will never happen. You listen to people who come from, I would consider Orthodox Christian doctrine, and they'll be like, well, I'm hoping to be like Jesus one day, but someday, I don't know if I ever get there. And it's just, and I understand the heart of that. I just feel like it's a tragedy to me, because it's like, no. Like, we're actually meant to live like Jesus, and he's not like above and beyond us. He is just like us. And he's actually, part of his mission is to awaken us to who we are, that we are like this. So I actually think that when he talks about doing greater things, he's actually talking about, because we have more time. There's a lot of things. I mean, there's more of us, there's more time, but we're actually getting to the root of something. So, for example, Jesus fed 5,000 people. That's a pretty cool miracle that he could, manipulate the laws of, or the way things operate in the natural realm. But see, we're so conditioned by the way things out here seem is the way it is. So like if there's a limited amount of food, we go, well, that's all the food there is, because we're so colored by scarcity. And that's the way it seems. And Jesus really didn't operate by that standard. So he he literally is coming from a different place, feeds 5,000 people. Poor people didn't have access to food. So what is a greater miracle? Is feeding 5,000 people a greater miracle that happens once, and by the way, they got to eat again the next day, which is another problem? Or is eradicating poverty a greater miracle? I would say eradicating poverty is actually the greater miracle, and I actually believe that we can do that. So we're going to get to the roots of why are people impoverished. You can feed poor people, have soup kitchens. It's all nice, but it really doesn't help anybody long term. But if you really want to help help people in poverty long term, help poor people long term, you help them see that they're not poor. You help them come out of mindsets of scarcity, and you help them understand that they have tremendous power within their being. And when they come into who they are, then they actually can come into the abundance of all that is. I think that's my understanding of a greater miracle. And we get to the roots of that in a way that Jesus never got to. He began the work, but we continue it.
Yeah, I like a lot of what you said, Jamal. I will add a caveat that I don't think it's simply about changing the mindset of the poor. I think it's about the the power structures, and we have to tear down the the current power structures that oppress poor people. So I think we would need to add something like that to the mix. But I'm tracking,
Yes.
I think, with both you guys. I like that you tied in the miracle to the greater truth of eradicating poverty. I like that. To the specific verse and the call, I think throughout John's gospel, we have this this attachment to Jesus not really doing his own will, like he's only doing the will of the Father. And so we get this really creative. I of course, look at things through a mimetic theory lens. So we have this imitation, this creative imitation that we are then to follow. And I don't think that means necessarily like being sacrificed on a cross. I think it's more to like what Keith and you, Jamal, were saying, is that we are humbly serving others, and in that do greater things, because that is going to. I like thinking of the gospel as a positive virus. Like it's going to start to put out its tentacles and start to go out there and imbue the world with this humble servant ethic of love. And so then it explodes like a virus. So I think I'm tracking with most of what y'all are saying.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that.
Well,
Like it's only found in John's gospel, and there is this real rich context of what it means to follow.
Totally. And I definitely agree with you, Matt. When it comes to, I wasn't directing my comments totally at people who would quote unquote be poor,
I know.
but I think the power structures that that are set up are actually rooted in a mindset of poverty. Even the folks that are, we have all these institutions and systems that are exploiting the poor, or creating systems of have and have nots. A lot of those come from a mindset of there's not enough, and so there's not a willingness to tackle the root of the problem because everyone's out to get theirs. And so a lot of our systems and structures are rooted in that mindset. So it's a poverty mindset all the way around, even with the quote unquote filthy rich in our society. So
great question.
Yeah,
and you know what, actually this question is beautiful because it sets us up perfectly for our heretic of the week.
It's the heretic of the week.
Hi, my name is Deshonna, and I'm a heretic.
Hi, Deshonna. Oh, Deshonna, I'm so excited to have you as a guest on our podcast. Wow. I guess we should probably kick this off by asking you the first question, which is, Deshonna, why is it that some people might think that you're a heretic?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I think that some people might think that I'm a heretic because I believe that policing in America hasn't changed in 70 years and it really needs a huge adjustment.
Yeah. So the first time I met you, we used to do this thing several years ago called Pacifist Fight Club. And I think at the time you were teaching at Biola.
Yes.
I don't know. Did I meet you through Tom Crisp?
I think so. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you came and spoke. I think our topic for that particular one was, we were talking about immigration and social. Yeah, exactly. Incarceration. Exactly. And you came and just blew my mind. And so I would love to hear you share some of these things, which I think a lot of people, and unfortunately, especially a lot of white people, probably don't keep in mind when they are talking about issues like, obeying the law and why are people going to prison and people would just follow the law, there wouldn't be a problem, and all these kinds of things. And you had some really interesting insights about that, especially when it came to race. So I just want you to talk about that. What are some things that you've noticed in your teaching, some of the disconnects, especially some of white Christians might have about this issue?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I think I remember I had so much fun at Pacifist Fight Club. It was crazy. And I think I went way over my time because we were just having so much fun. I think that what I encounter most when I'm interacting with white, I would say middle class, upper middle class Christians, is just this idea that like, so police officers are heroes and they're awesome and they're amazing and they're protectors of our society and our community. And so they're never wrong.
Mhm.
They're never wrong. Like what they do is awesome. If there is some way or some reason or some, we find some one officer that was bad, it's a bad apple. It's a quote unquote bad apple in the bunch. And so we need to, deal with that one individual or that individual activity, super separately than thinking about the police force in general
Mhm.
or the way that we approach policing in America.
Yes. Well, and that you see, you're exactly right. And I've noticed this when I've started. So, for example, when you have, and unfortunately, there is a never-ending, list of these examples of these kinds of things, where a white police officer will shoot usually an unarmed black male or female, and then the reaction from Christian and unfortunately white people mostly is to say, well, they should have just listened to the police officer. Why didn't they just do the right thing?
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. And then any criticism of the police in those kinds of situations, this is what drives me insane, is always taken as criticism of every police officer. Whereas if you were to shift it, if you would have said, here's another news story about a teacher who sexually molested one of his students. Well, then now if I say, well, that guy was wrong and that was evil and it shouldn't happen, and the education system, the school should take measures to make sure that they weed those people out, that they do some training, that they watch these kinds of teachers and don't allow these things to happen in the future. No one would take that as a criticism that I'm trying to say all teachers are molesters. Now, I'm not trying to say that. I'm just trying to say that in that particular case, that was wrong and we should do something to stop it. But if I say the same thing about police, hey, we have a problem in the police department. This keeps happening. Why does it keep happening? And can we fix it? Oh, no. Now you're attacking the police. You don't understand.
And they have a super hard job. You don't know what they have to do. And they have to make these decisions in 30 seconds and their life is in danger. And I'm like, social workers actually work with that same exact population without guns.
Yes.
So,
well, that's the thing too. I mean, this is the thing too about I've had people say, exactly what you just said. And I'm like, yeah, so you're right. If I was in that situation and I had 30 seconds and I had a gun in my hand, would I make the right decision? Well, here's the thing. I haven't had years of training. And I did not sign up for a job where I knew that would be my job. So those guys did, and they have. So yes, we should hold them to a slightly higher standard,
What? Are you saying that to whom much is given, much is required?
Something like that. Yeah. So it does seem, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say, so I think what happens, I think you have a few different things that are going on. I mean, I totally want to separate. In my field, we talk about things at a micro level and at a macro level. So the micro level is the individual level. So thinking about individual officers and their actions day to day on the street. And then there's a macro level which is kind of more looking more at a system that is set up in a way that will not be super successful in dealing with diverse communities and diverse populations, the way that it presently stands. So at the micro level, yes, it's kind of like if you are given the ability within the scope of your job to use lethal force and to take a life, it seems to me that pro-life people would want those folks to be super well trained. And would be wanting to think about all kinds of scenarios and things that could happen and go wrong because it's so serious to end a life. At least that's what I hear from pro-life folks when we're talking about the reproductive rights of women. So it seems like we would have that same vigor in talking about law enforcement. But it doesn't seem to be matched in the conversations that I've had. I think that it stemmed in their own personal experience of law enforcement. So having been a person that I grew up in South LA, so I grew up in the inner city, and so had the experience of what it feels like to be policed in the inner city. And now, as a university professor, I'm in a different socioeconomic class. I live in a different neighborhood. And so I now have the suburban police experience. Which I think is pretty unique for me. And they are different, right?
Can you talk about that? Yeah.
If I grew up if I grew up in the suburbs, like where I live now, I rarely see police officers. I mean, it's super rare for me to see a police car even. So when I do see officers, it generally is like they're responding to a car crash on the side of the road, or perhaps a neighbor has called law enforcement because they needed some type of emergency help. So the officer's coming to assist. My own home, someone tried to burgle my home. And so officers came out and helped my late husband at the time, and cleared the house for us. Another time, my mailbox was broken into, and the officers came out and was super helpful, provided some great advice. And they were just very kind. Like the entire approach to speaking with me, it never felt like I was wasting their time or anything like that. It was kind of like, how can I be helpful? And what do you need from us? How can we serve you better? Right. So if you've grown up and that's been your experience of law enforcement, and you also have the ability to completely disregard the lived experiences of other people, then you might feel like this is how law enforcement is everywhere. Right. And so the reality is that, like, within the field of criminology, there are actually theoretical perspectives about policing. So different agencies have different frameworks that they work from even. So some people have a guardianship framework where I am a guardian of this community. Others have a warrior framework, like I'm a warrior preparing for battle. That's simple. And I'm not even getting into a whole bunch of the information, but that simple difference there will change the approach of that agency to the community. It changes their interactions, et cetera. As you can imagine, if you're preparing for battle, you're going to approach, walking around the community differently than if you're seeing yourself as a guardian, right? So that's super simple. So they don't realize that, like, in the suburbs that they've grown up in, they probably have encountered officers with a guardian mentality more often. So they are kind of, I'm a guardian of the community. I see myself as a protector of the community, rather than, I have to stay on guard for all of these threats because my life is in danger. And okay, yeah, you're gonna interact with people differently. You're gonna talk to people differently. You're gonna approach them differently. Whether or not your hand's on your gun, whether or not you're drawing your weapon, like all of that is going to be different. Like one slight move is going to be viewed as like, well, he could have been reaching for a gun rather than he could have been scratching his head. Yeah. Right. So I really want to hope that that's where that thought is coming from. What I would like to offer to those folks is, like, similar to Jesus, let's take the lived experiences of people and treat them as if they're real. Yeah. So let's realize that whatever I experience in my walk of life, it doesn't mean that everybody experiences life the way I do. Yeah. So hearing someone else who is describing a lived experience that is different from mine, I should be able to kind of just listen to them and believe that actually happened. Yeah. Like, you actually have that experience because I have no information about that experience.
Right. Well, and then see, you're touching on something, right? So, we, let me just say, I guess from the perspective of I am a white guy who was raised by white people and grew up in a white privilege sort of bubble, and so I understand what it's like when you're watching the news and you see, you read a story about a police officer who goes into a black neighborhood and whatever, something happened, and he told him to stop and he didn't stop, or he told him to keep his hands up and he put his hands down. And so he had to kill him. He shot him. You typically listen to those scenarios through your grid of, well, hey, anytime I've encountered the police and they told me to do, I just did what he said. And they were very respectful and they were very, I don't understand. So this could only have happened if the person was just, behaving in a totally unacceptable way. So it's because we don't, not only do we not listen to the other stories, we can't listen without the filter. Like, I mean, I can listen to the story, but I'm still going to say, yeah, but you did something wrong. You just didn't. Yeah.
So true. Yeah. So true. Yeah. And so if you've never actually been in front of a cop and that cop was nervous, scared, or afraid of you simply by looking at you, you really don't know how scary that situation is. So I can say personally, I have a lot of friends. I'm a former police dispatcher. I have officers currently working and retired who teach for me at my current job. I'm friends with a lot of officers, and I am still like afraid as all get out if I'm pulled over by law enforcement. Because when they pull me over, they're going to see a Black woman. They're not going to see like a university professor that teaches criminology with a PhD. Like they don't know all of that.
Don't you wish you could have like a T-shirt or something, or a hat or a badge that just said with the flashes, "Hi, I am a college professor with a PhD."
Well, I wish we lived in a society where it wasn't necessary, but the implicit bias that is going on inside of their head, that reel is giving them information, whether they realize it or not. Like the whole idea of it being implicit is that you don't realize it. So we all have narratives going on in our heads about things. So one of the narratives that we've mentioned already is just like the number of stories that you see in the media, and how often there is a Black or brown person that is the quote unquote suspect of a crime. Even when you're watching just regular television shows, I mean, I feel like if you pay attention to the number of times a Black or brown person is the quote unquote suspect in whatever policing or criminal justice television show you're watching, that alone is alarming. Like, so that alone is giving you information that Black and brown people are like innately criminal for some reason. Without realizing that, no, perhaps the producer in Hollywood lacked a diverse team and didn't realize how many images they're putting out there. Like sometimes I feel like I just tell people, like, watch the ID channel for a little bit, because it's based off of like crimes that actually occurred, and pay attention to how many times the offender is white and how many times the offender is the same race as the victim. So there's that, right?
No, you're right.
like that's what data suggests, is that we are most often victimized by people within our own communities, and our communities tend to be pretty homogeneous. So if you live in a predominantly white neighborhood, you're most likely going to be victimized by another white person than you are a Black or brown person.
Yes, that's really good. And Deshonna, this is Jamal, by the way. It's great to have you on our podcast, and love what you're sharing here. I guess my question for you would be is, because you've experienced, growing up in an urban area, okay, you experienced one type of policing, and then moving to the suburbs, you experienced another type of policing. And so you're exposed to these two different, mindsets. My question would be, when did you develop the passion to say, hey, I want to help? Because I feel like a lot of your work, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of your work is trying to help folks who may be on, who've had one view of policing, like the suburban view of policing, that have this idea of, oh, it's, there's just one bad apple, that spoils it for the police. But you're pointing out systemic institutional problems with policing. When did you become, or how did you become passionate, where your work is now to educate those folks at a systemic about the need for systemic change? How did that happen for you?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I would say that's part of my work. The other part of my work is helping people from marginalized communities realize that they have a voice. They have just as much of a right to be in these professions, and that they have the power to change and speak into things moving forward. But to answer your question, how I got involved, shoot, I feel like I'm going to try to make a long story short. So so it starts when I was however many years old when when I tell my students I'm 25, so I'm sticking to that.
Oh, there you go.
Um, but when I was younger and the shooting happened in Columbine, and I'll just say I was a teenager. I was like a teenager. I think I was like a preteen or young teenager, somewhere around there. And the shootings happened in Columbine, and it's all over the news because this was like one of our first like large school shootings that happened in a suburban neighborhood. And so it was before school shootings and mass shootings have become just an American thing. I remember like on the news, there were all these different like news stories about these guys who had committed this act. And all of them were saying things like, wow, like how did we fail them? Society has failed them. Their families have failed them. Somewhere something went wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like going in depth into their bedrooms and looking at pictures of them when they were 5 years old and 3 years old.
Right. And
how can
the music they listen to and the movies they watch. Yeah.
Yeah. So they started really just trying to analyze like where did we go wrong? And for me, I had a moment of thinking, wow, there's something about the geography, it must be, that makes us question where we went wrong when we're talking about these guys. And guys in my neighborhood are referred to as a menace to society or a monster or an evil person.
Thugs or
thugs, yeah. So I think that was probably the early first thought of like just experiencing and seeing a difference. From there, the way that I tell the story, I've ended up in a place, I had a master's degree and I ended up unemployed, and I'm a first generation college student. So I'm kind of I need to make my own way. I need to be able to pay my own bills. And so I was in a place where I was like, man, I need a job. And I ended up applying just like to all kinds of jobs because I needed income to pay my student loans. And I got hired as a police dispatcher. And this was like so disparate for me. It was so different for me because I was got in trouble with police as a kid, but just in my neighborhood, officers were never really friendly. They were, they always enter my neighborhood with guns drawn. And so I actually was really afraid of them. So the way that officers describe being afraid of members of the community, I was afraid of them. I could be in an establishment like a restaurant and a cop walks in and I would start shaking because, my experience of officers at that point was that somebody could die. Or get hurt really bad or get beat up or all kinds of things that happened with LAPD back in those days. So getting hired as a police dispatcher was kind of, oh my God, what am I going to do? But I'm also kind of in a I need a job and the bills are due. And so it's nothing but God. I tell the story now to my students because I'm like, the way that God will weave together the tapestry of your life is just amazing because I would never have written it this way. So
it puts you in their world, so to speak. So it's no more like us
now. So
even.
The number one job of a police officer is to help ensure officer safety. So I'm looking out for the safety of officers at that point. I want to make sure that my officers get home at night. So doing everything in my power to do that. So it was a job I absolutely loved. It was a lot of fun. And it kind of let me behind the curtain, so to speak. I was able to kind of see that man, these guys, and I say guys because it was mostly men male officers that I worked with. It's still a male dominated field, but we need so many more women because women do so much better. They have so fewer police brutality charges, but that's a whole different, yeah, it's a whole different topic. But yeah, I was like, these guys are kind of so similar to the guys in my neighborhood. I think that they just don't understand each other. And so from that, at that moment is when I realized that that God had given me a gift. Like I'm a bridge builder, so I understand those different sides of the equation. So from there is when I was like, so yeah, the best way to affect change is to teach people who want to go into this profession. So I went back to school and got a PhD.
Wow.
Oh, that's incredible. What a story.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great. So do you get pushback? I mean, when you're in your class and you're presenting these kinds of different perspectives to some of your students who don't have your same background and experience and don't have the same automatic assumptions about the police or about the criminal justice system, what are the kinds of reactions you get? I mean, what are the kind of things that they say, like, oh, wait a minute, that can't be true?
Yeah, absolutely. So absolutely. That is definitely like the first response and reaction is the kind of, that isn't true. What's more information? I would love to see the first 10 seconds of the video. That's always
Right.
one. Yeah. Yeah. Because I feel like we missed the part where this person, did something,
Right. It had to be.
Then it had to be. So when I start kind of doing things like, well, let's look at Philando Castile, who legally had a weapon. He was very compliant. He informed the officers, like, I have a weapon, I have a license to carry a concealed, like he identified, he did everything right and still ended up dead in that encounter. And then this happens over and over and over and over and over again. It doesn't matter if you're a woman. It doesn't matter if you're pregnant. It doesn't matter if your children are in front of you. It doesn't matter if you're in medical school, like the most recent case going on right now. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter even if you are employed in a criminal justice profession. None of that matters in that moment. So, first it's kind of like talking to them about that and pointing out those things. Students are fun. So for me, students are fun because they're learning and they are malleable, they're teachable. They really want to know and they really seek justice. Like they really want to do the right thing. It's when I'm encountering either people that are veterans in the criminal justice world or professions or alumni, parents, those kinds of folks. Those are less fun conversations.
Yeah.
Because they tend to be more static. Like they're just not, willing to change. So what I try to offer to them is I had a conversation maybe a year ago with an officer who I love dearly. And I was telling him, because he's like, well, they're asking all these questions and they're pushback and they're not complying. He's saying when he's pulling people over. And I said, well, can you show me a member of Gen Z who doesn't do that? I mean, we taught people to ask questions as a means of developing their critical thinking skills. So we changed parenting style, starting with millennials. Like we told them you have choices and you have options. So when we go to the store, which candy do you want? And I remember my nephew growing up, he would really look over every single candy because he wanted to make a good decision.
Yeah.
And then he would ask questions about that. So we changed parenting, right, in that vein. So now that those children are adults, they can't just turn that off. So sometimes
that's fascinating. I don't think anybody's talking about this.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're asking questions because we taught them to ask questions. They're not being non-compliant.
Right.
They're just asking more questions.
So, Deshonna, do you think that, and this may be super simplistic, but do you feel like one of the major things that we need in our society is to just the way we approach training police officers? I mean, is that just is that the only answer, or is that one of the answers, or how is it that we could possibly move from this place we are now into a situation that would, allow police officers to adopt more of a guardian mentality than a warrior mentality? Or is there also things that need to be done on the other side? Whereas as far as like just the people themselves, whether they're in Black communities, urban communities, or in white communities.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like such a multi-pronged approach that's needed. I mean, one, I'm going to say that there's just a whole lot of people that need to retire.
Yeah. Yes.
That's just kind of, and I'm sure millennials listening will be like, amen, sister.
Yeah.
many different reasons. But there's just some folks that have they just present themselves as untrainable. Like, you're not malleable, like you're just not tenacid. And so I think that in any profession, when you've gotten there, it's just time for you to retire. And I think that that's fine. I hope one day when I get there, I can just like retire somewhere and spend lots of time on beaches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's my life. So, it's a good thing. It's a great thing. But yeah, you have some people that are just so wedded to this former way of doing things that I don't know that they can continue in law enforcement change at the same time. I think that policies, practices, and procedures of the actual agencies need to change. And I think that they are changing. So LAPD, for example, just 2 years ago, I think it's been about 2, maybe 3 years, adopted a policy of de-escalation. So forever, people think that, like, and I don't know, maybe it's because they think that officers are like Superman. So they feel like, the superhero, of course, is going to try to de-escalate before they use lethal force. That actually just became policy maybe 2 or 3 years ago with LAPD. So now people are being trained in de-escalation as the first line of defense, like the first thing you try to de-escalate, then you raise the stakes. I think having more of a community justice model. So having more community members in to help police the police. So rather than just officers hearing these cases of use of force, that there should be non-sworn individuals, so people that are not employed by the police department should also be able to speak into those as well, so that we have a little bit more. Yeah, I mean, I think if I had a disciplinary action filed against me at my job, people that are not faculty members are going to be able to speak into that as well and review that case, not just faculty members who work with me every day. And I'm not saying that our internal affairs officers don't work. I mean, I think that they totally can. I think that having other minds in the room can help you to think outside of the box.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you don't even realize that you're in the box,
right,
so. Exactly.
When I worked in the prison, every time we had a use of force, it was reviewed. I mean, you have to file a paperwork for use of force report. And then there was, we call an institutional inspector which was not they were not part of the security apparatus of the prison. They would overview that and look at that. And, so that was essential for that very reason. And again, in the culture of it, we didn't like those folks and when we were there, just because it was such an us and them mentality. And obviously on this show, Heretic Happy Hour, it's obviously a different, what we're trying to do, specifically talking to Christians and religious folks, is because even in religious parts of the religious society, there is such, and this is unfortunate because I don't believe Jesus modeled this at all. I don't think Jesus looked at humanity as certain subsets and us and them kind of a thing. But that's what we're trying to do, is try to help people from a religious background and say, look, we need to start viewing humanity the way God does, which is not through the lens of sectarianism or us and them. And it'd be nice if this would carry over into policing, if this would carry over into every aspect of society. I mean, literally, it would end conflict and wars and all the stuff that we are plagued with in our societies, and so it at a philosophical level is so important. I think the work you're doing is so vital. How can folks get in touch with you, or how can our listeners stay in touch with what you're doing? I don't know if you're writing a book or what you're doing, but what's the connection? How can people follow you?
Yeah, that's great. So, I mean, if they're interested in going into a profession, they should totally check out Azusa Pacific University's Department of Criminal Justice. We're doing some amazing, crazy, out-the-box things and helping our students to think about these things throughout their degree program. So that's one way to find me, is that website. Then also, I am on social media. So Deshonna Collier-Goubil at I think on Twitter, I'm just at Deshonna Collier. I'm also on Facebook. And that's about as far as I can go with social media.
That's far enough, I think.
Yeah, that's knowledge base. That's my knowledge base right there.
Totally.
My department, my team, we will be working on a book next year. We're not working on it right now, but we'll be working on a book that'll be looking at faith integration in criminal justice. So talking about some of these things and some of the practices that we do with our students in the classroom will be shared in that. So I think that'll be really good when we get that going, hopefully in about a year.
That's fantastic. Awesome.
That's awesome. Well, Deshonna, I just got to say, as your brother in Christ, I love you. I love what you're doing. I'm so glad you're doing what you're doing. And man, I just want to encourage you to keep going, keep doing what you're doing, because I think it is making an impact and a difference. And I hope that there are more voices like yours out there that are helping us to see in new ways, in different ways, and hopefully moving us closer to something where we are honoring people just because they're people and we're not seeing them through these other lenses. And so, I think it's great. Thank you so much.
Amen. Thank you so much. It's been great talking with you guys.
Yeah. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye. Wow. That was awesome. I got to say, Deshonna, she's just one of my heroes. I really love her. Many years ago when we did this Pacifist Fight Club thing, it was when I first met her, and she just blew my doors off. So very, very excited to have her as our Heretic of the Week. And I really love just her insights on this topic, which is going to be our topic for our podcast here about the criminal justice system.
Yeah, and she's probably going to make us all look dumb because she was great.
Yes. Yeah, I don't think that'd be very hard to do, though.
No, of course not. We're a bunch of idiots, right?
Yeah. I think, well, we were saying, before, like Jamal, of all of us, probably has the most experience with the criminal justice system. Not that he's been behind bars that I'm aware of, but he has. No, actually, you have been behind bars, Jamal.
I have. I spent almost 5 years behind bars.
You maybe should explain that.
Yeah. Yes, I spent almost 5 years behind bars in a state penitentiary in Ohio.
Yes.
But
Go Buckeyes. Go Buckeyes.
Go Buckeyes. Yes. But it was at 8-hour increments. So I would do
and you got paid for it.
I got paid for it. Yes, I was a corrections officer.
And you got paid.
For about almost 5 years. And so, yes, I did work in a prison. But I was arrested a few times as a teenager because I had I got in a lot of trouble in my 15, 16, 17-year-old years. And there were a few times I was taken to juvenile hall, and I've been on the other side of that, not for long periods of time, but there were moments of that. So, but the criminal, it's interesting because as a young adult, when after I got out of high school, and kind of a crazy story how I even got a job as in a state penitentiary as a corrections officer, was definitely unqualified for that job. But the fact that I started my professional life career, I look back on it and I see that job as so instrumental for the work I'm doing in the world even now. I didn't know that obviously back then, but I just love how all the experiences we have in our life are really in preparation for the work that we're here to do on the earth. I really believe that. And so I got a taste pretty early on as a young adult, really trying to figure out my place in the world. I just was confronted with this. The problem just seems so overwhelming to me, especially you're in there 8 hours a day and you're surrounded by people who are they're at their worst. And you can't help. For me, it was like, we were taught, and we had this academy that we'd have to go through before we, got the job. So it was this academy, and then we had probationary period for 9 months. I mean, it was pretty rigorous. But in that whole process, one of the things that was drilled in our head was they have a 6-digit number. So when you go to prison, every inmate is assigned a number, and they tell you this. This is at least the way it was when I was working there. Like, they are a ward of the state, basically, almost like property. They didn't come out and say that. They said, but they are a ward of the state. They have a 6-digit number. They're not like you. You never want to get to a place where you see them like you, because the entire institution of the prison is predicated upon this idea of separation, that you are the staff and they are the inmates. And so it's that really bothered me at a deep level. And I wasn't quite conscious of why that was, but it just seemed inhumane. And really, eventually I started to see these people as, oh my goodness, this is where I became convinced in the goodness of humanity was actually working in the prison, because I realized they were just like me. And underneath all that behavior was just pain. Yeah.
So I think this is what you're saying here, Jamal, is a great place to start. I think is that unfortunately, a lot of the failures in our criminal justice system, and specifically in on the jail side of things, the prison system, it is sort of like it's not really, for the most part, focused on rehabilitation. And that was when I was getting my bachelor's degree. I took a criminal justice course, and my instructor was a judge. And that was one of the things he brought out right off the bat, was that he said the failure of the American criminal justice system and prison system is that it isn't based on rehabilitation. And he brought up things like you're bringing up about how you dehumanize people, and like you can't rehabilitate someone if you take away their humanity and their dignity. And I think that's a fundamental flaw. Like in other words, we're so focused on the punishment part of it. Well, no, we've got to punish them as if punishment in itself is going to either make up for the crime that they committed, or in some ways change them. Right. And I think we have to get away from this mindset of just punishment for the sake of punishment. But don't you think it's rooted in sort of Christianity, evangelical Christianity in America, where it's this pervasive idea that the way to solve problems, the way to react to quote unquote bad people, is to just punish them, because that's what God's going to do, right? God's just going to punish them and punish them and punish them. And that's the best way to respond to sin or to bad behavior.
Yeah, I don't know if it's like rooted in Christianity per se, but it's definitely the same.
Mm-hmm.
I think most of our systems are retributive in that way, and you're right. It's not about rehabilitation. That's one reason. As an aside, that's one reason why when you talk about universalism with justice, people don't get it, because it's restorative, right? So there can still be justice and reconciliation, and our system, our prison system, is not set up for that. And I wasn't behind bars for as long as Jamal. But we actually had doors. I worked for county probation. We had doors with windows. I worked in a juvenile hall, and I remember, and this pretty much sums up the experience for me. And I'm not going to say the fellow counselors. We call them counselors. We were doing a decent job for what the system was. But one thing that really bothered me is we had a couple pods that were empty, and I remember a supervisor said, we got to fill these beds, because that's how we get funded. And I was like, God damn. I mean, for one, what do you want? What do you want me to do? You want me to go arrest kids and bring them in?
Yeah.
Is that what? What do we? That didn't make any sense. But just the mentality that this whole system, and they had probation officers, and those were. I mean, the recidivism rate was so high because it was just like this cyclical money making machine. It seemed like, and yeah, people need jobs and all that kind of stuff, and that's how they sold it as, we got to have money, we got to have beds so we get money so we can pay you. But the whole mentality was like, wait a second, to fill beds we need kids committing crimes. We need our streets with kids in it doing shit that we don't really want them to be doing, or at least we say that, but in their minds that was the way to make them. And it was just like, wow.
Well, this is partly how corruption sort of bleeds into our system. So I would say that our criminal justice system, our prison systems have become corrupt. And this is one of the reasons why, is because we have these for-profit prisons now, which creates a system where people are making millions of dollars. I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Yeah,
Right, billions,
yeah, it's a multi-billion-dollar
billions.
industry. But individual people that own these prisons are making millions and hundreds of millions of dollars.
Oh,
And again, they can only do that if, as you said, well, we need more people. We need more, people in these beds, because there'll be more people building, free labor, so they can be building furniture or whatever it is we're selling with this free slave labor, essentially. And by the way, there have been things exposed where there are judges, juvenile judges, for an example. I think this was somewhere on the East Coast. Happened a few years ago, where a juvenile court judge was caught giving first time offenders, juveniles, longer sentences and sending them to this particular prison. And he was getting kickbacks because people were making money on this. And so it became this money making thing where, hey, we, like you said, well, the only way we make money is if we fill these beds. And the only way to fill these beds is if we have more juveniles, caught with crimes, given more than a break. We can't give them a slap on the wrist. We've got to sentence them. And that's exactly what was happening. So when you have a system that's sort of people are financially motivated not to rehabilitate people, that's not a good system.
Not at all, man. Not at all. And not to mention that it's particularly targeted against people of color.
Yes.
Because as we know, I mean, I quote it in one of my books. Where's the quote? I got it right here. It's regarding the drug laws.
Yes.
And this is going back to 2011, so it's dated, but there were roughly 225,000 people incarcerated for drug offenses. 45% were black, 30% were white, in spite of the fact that white people typically do drugs at a higher rate than black people.
That's right. But they just don't get charged. Yeah, exactly.
They just don't get charged. They don't get convicted. They don't get time. And that's just like, damn. So that add that fuel to the fire too. And we got a whole system that's so fucked up.
Well, I kind of want to touch on something you said, Keith, about is our criminal justice system kind of rooted in our Christian ideas of justice. And I kind of think it is, honestly. My philosophy on this is America is very unique. I mean, there are other countries in the world that have extremely harsh prison systems, that are not rehabilitative at all. But there are places in the world that do have really good prison systems. Like, it actually works for the case of rehabilitation. America is not one of those countries, though, at all. There is nothing rehabilitative. Even when I worked in the prison system in Ohio, it is still called the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction. And as if those two things they kind of go together. And I think they can go together. But America, you have to understand that a lot of our consciousness as a society, I mean, we're all products of history. None of us were born, no generation is born into a blank slate. We're all affected by the previous generations. Our country was founded by Puritans and folks who had a view of justice that was very religious based, rooted in the flaws of Christianity in that sense. And one of those flaws is the penal substitution error. Like, the idea of justice is penal in nature. And that is a problem. That's a huge problem. That idea that justice is penal I do believe in our country is rooted in religious ideas, even if that's not conscious. So, in our generation today, but it is there. So there's another way to look at justice, as we touched on, Matt, I think you were talking about this. There's another way to look at justice as being restorative. And I actually think that that's where we get into healing. There's a sickness when we look at people's behavior as a byproduct of sickness, not when we understand sin as a sickness, not as a penal, code violation that we've broken, a law that's been violated, not like that. We understand as a sickness, then that's where rehabilitation comes in. And so there's some great prisons. I mean, Portugal is an example. I think it was, Norway? There's some great examples of, where they recognized, especially with drug epidemics. I think the drug epidemic is very telling of why are people on drugs at a higher rate? What's the point of that? And there's been some places around the world that have gotten to the root of that there's a lot of human suffering. And when they go to prison, I actually remember listening to I think it was some government official in European country talking about the idea of that she actually came out and said, our goal is not to lock them away, but to actually reintroduce them to the fabric of society.
Yeah,
And,
exactly.
and
Yeah,
that's the goal. And that's what happens.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. And so, as you said, Norway and some other countries have taken this kind of posture, and it just backs up to, what do you want to do? What is your goal overall? And you can decide. I mean, we could decide as a country. We could look at our criminal justice system and our prison system. We could decide to reform that and say, you know what? We recognize that it's actually not only best for those particular individuals who are guilty of these crimes, whatever these crimes may be. It could be drug offense. It could even be violent offenses. And say, it's not only better for them as individuals if we focus on rehabilitation and bringing them back into society again, but it's also good for our society. It's actually good for us as a people, as a nation. And if we got that mindset, we could shift and we could decide, you know what, because of that, now we're going to make reforms and make changes to our prison system that are focused on, getting to the root of the problem. Do they need therapy? Do they need counseling? Do they need to learn job skills? Do they need to understand why they feel this way, or why they are, have these tendencies to behave certain ways, or whatever it may be, or they have an addiction issue? Well, let's deal with that, because that is a, in other words, like that person is a victim if they have an addiction, right? There's something that led to that addiction. They need help getting, free from that addiction. Well, why don't we help them? Because then overall, that's going to be better for us as a society to bring them back into the society. And again, it's one of these things where we can do it if we want to, and we can even look at other nations and see that when they wanted to and they did, it was better for them as a country, and better for the people that went into their system. They came out better people.
Yeah. We have that cognitive dissonance, especially here in the States, though, it seems, because take Norway, for example. We look at one of those prisons. I think it's called what was it, like Bastoy? So. It looks like a day camp, and we would look at that and be like, oh, so they get to commit crimes and then go hang out on vacation, and it's like a day spa, and they don't get all their rights taken away. And we see that, and we have that reaction. Well, we're not going to do our prisons here like that. But then at the same time, it's proof that system of justice is much more healthy and much more healing. The recidivism rate is like more than half of what it is here. So people are reintegrating into society and then not committing the crimes that they committed before. And isn't that the goal?
Well, and this is where our political leaders could, and this is one of the reasons I do believe, again, our last episode was about politics. I actually think there's some action needed at the political level to correct this. Our politician, and again, it's all mindset, but change can happen. Prison reform is a big issue in political circles, and I think it needs to be. And one of the things we can do as a people, as a country, as a society, is to say, okay, look, we don't know it all. As Americans, we don't have it figured out. These European countries were modeling their criminal justice system based on America's criminal justice system, and they figured out it doesn't work. So they scrapped it. So we could actually learn from their example and go, what are you guys doing that's actually working? And your crime rates are dropping, and people are like, it's totally doable. But I actually experienced this personally when I worked in the prison, because I was young when I worked in there. I mean, I'm not a big guy. I'm not intimidating.
That,
I can't.
You make me feel tall. Yeah.
Totally. I mean, people compare me to Carlton. So like,
you make me feel. I'm a Nephilim. You make me feel like a Nephilim.
Totally. Totally. So it's not like there were officers when I worked in there that were like very intimidating. They would use brute force to get to where they had a reputation that they got spread around the prison, but folks would respect them for that. I couldn't do that. It just wasn't my MO. But one of the things when I got some seniority, one of my main posts I ended up working at was a post called security control, which is basically like called the hole. And so in our prison, we had dormitory style. So inmates would be housed in dorms of 500 in one dorm, 250 on the upstairs, 250 in the downstairs, to 4 officers. So the ratio was 500 to 4. And it was very chaotic. So people who got seniority didn't like to work those posts. So I ended up working, when I got seniority, I worked a post where it was 2-man cells. It was max security, part of the prison. It was the part of the prison where if you got in a fight, if you were doing drugs, if you committed a violent offense in the prison, they would lock you up in the hole. It's like jail within jail. So literally they're locked down 23 out of 24 hours a day, 2-man cells. And it was, in that, I preferred that because it was more controlled, and I did not like to be surrounded with all this chaos. So in that security control, these were the inmates that had nothing left to lose. I mean, they were locked up. They were in jail, and they're throwing out feces and urine on the range. They're screaming and yelling. They don't have any incentive of doing anything. So when I would come in for a shift, the previous shift that I was relieving, the officer would show me, they have a log book, and they'd say, this cell, this guy is creating a havoc and he's doing all this. And so they call them yellow marks. So they'd mark that cell with a yellow mark on the log book. And they would tell me, and I'd come in knowing, okay, here's the problems that I have to deal with. And so I kind of stumbled on it, but I just thought, look, I got 8 hours to do. I'm going to do it. So I would tell these guys, like, look, if you don't cooperate with me, then, it's going to be difficult for you. But that was not my goal. I'm like, my goal isn't to make life difficult for you. You're already in jail. But I just started to get to know them. It gave me opportunity and space to get to know them and to hear their story. It took a lot of time, little by little, but it was crazy. I remember one day, this guy on the second shift, when I was working third shift, I'd come in. He goes, what's crazy? He goes, the yellow marks just started going away from the previous shift. They just started going away. These inmates that were in there and someone would be in there for they'd have a 3-month or 6-month stint in the hole, a long time. And they just started, the behavior started to change. And I'm just one guy on one shift. There's 3 other shifts or 2 other shifts. And the behavior started to clean up for them. And they were like, yeah, I don't know what's gotten in. And I started noticing those are the folks I was connecting to at a personal level. I mean, it's crazy.
Yes.
On a personal human level. That's right. I like thinking about all these things in a, like, stepping back and thinking of them holistically. So I like to tie in these kind of things with the theological as well. And it seems like the more we talk about issues like this of justice, the less impact things like, let's say, for example, penal substitution atonement, the less impact that seems to have, because we can see that version of justice simply doesn't work in the life. The connection on the human level, like you're saying, Jamal, or the stuff that's going on in Norway where it's rehabilitative and restorative, you're like, wow, it actually affects us positively in the day-to-day as on a real relational, personal, societal level. And to me, like, when we can have biblical arguments, we can have philosophical arguments, we can have exegetical arguments. But I think where a lot of the real good meat for an argument against certain bad theologies, I'll call them, is in the day-to-day, in how it plays out in the real world. If we're sacrificially minded, if we're retributive minded, our society looks one way, and it looks like shit. And it's not good. And when we look at it through like a connecting to people on a human level, trying to restore relationships, trying to heal the hurt, not criminalizing addiction, things like that, we start to see a whole different society that is more healthy, more functional, more loving, more gracious, and all those good things. And to me, some of the best arguments against bad theology is just, how does this play out in real time?
Yeah, that's a good point.
What if our prison system is our bad theology being played out?
I think to a great degree, it probably is. It probably is.
No, I think, look, you can't, I don't think we can discount the fact, if we just look at the history of America, right, and all the different religious movements, they have had an impact on our justice system. Even though, like, there's such a strong feeling among American, not just American Christians, but I think Americans in general, that, well, our justice system is based on the 10 Commandments, which is a very rigid, do this or, off with your head kind of system. It underpins the assumptions of the way we have approached in this nation, the way we have approached crime. And I think that's why we have not, as a nation, as a society, been open to these kind of ideas of the kind of things we're talking about that we see going on in Norway, this sort of restorative justice. But at the same time, whenever you see there's a couple of really great clips on YouTube of like one is a guy where he's a prisoner and he's in jail for the rest of his life for murdering a woman and her child. And he's just kind of talking about, how he committed this horrible crime and how growing up he never knew what love was, that actually his father would beat him and say, this hurts me more than it hurts you. And that gave him this really twisted idea of what love was. And so he always growing up felt like he wanted to hurt other people around him to see how much could I hurt them and would they still love me? And then he ends up committing this horrible crime. He gets put in prison for the rest of his life. And then the mother of the woman that he murdered starts writing to him, starts visiting him in prison, starts showing him love and forgiveness, this radical love and forgiveness in a way that no one had ever done in his entire life. And it totally transforms this guy. And it's a beautiful testimony just to hear him, telling it and the impact it's made on his life. And it's like, yes, see, that is beautiful. And why can't we encourage more of those kinds of things so that people who commit the most horrific crimes we can imagine get to have an experience of that forgiveness and that restoration and that transformation? Like, that's just a good thing. It's a good thing in general. It's a good thing for that person. And it's a good thing for our society to be a society that sees that as a goal. Like, why wouldn't we want that for everyone? It's just a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And I do think it comes back down to understanding really getting to the root of the belief of how do we view humanity? Are there evil people? Are there throwaway people? And our theology, not my theology, but the Christian theology, not Jesus theology. When I say Christian, I'm not talking about Jesus. I'm talking about Christianity. The theology of what has become Christianity is that there are evil people. Right. There are throwaway people that can just be discarded in hell, people that can be discarded in, whatever. And that carries over. That's real life implications. And so that's what our prison system is. These are throwaway people. But when you realize, when you come out of that and you say there are no throwaway people, there are people who need healing. But even looking at our country's history with slavery, this was a belief that these people are really good for just servitude. Mm-hmm. They're really not at a level of humanity. And I've heard some stats that show that, when it comes to especially like African American community, like they really haven't broke out of this mindset of have they been affected? Like there's more people, more African Americans in prison now than were ever in slavery. And I honestly think that we haven't overcome that. We haven't overcome these belief systems as a society. Fundamentally, like, so it just changes language, but the way, why are minority communities so affected? Mm-hmm. And why are they being locked up at rates that are just not proportionate to white people? And I literally think it's this mindset, deep, it's not conscious, but subconscious view of almost like this idea that some people are just worthless and subhuman and good for nothing. And this is really, I see it all the time. I hear it in the comments that people make about people from, minority communities or inner city communities, or, I can't tell you how many, even in my own conversations when I worked in the prison with corrections officials, that happened to be white, and we would call them from the good old boy club, but to hear how they would talk about folks of color and minorities in prison, it's stunning. And I don't think a lot has changed.
Yeah, I think you're right.
No, I don't think it has. I don't think it has. And not to mention in all of this, because our system is so money based, if you're from a poor community, you got no chance. If you're from a rich community and you got money, it's almost like you can buy your way off. I mean, this whole thing, like, I mean, looking like the banking crisis, one dude got locked up, I think, and it was like a low level manager or something. Yeah. And all these fucking corporate suits, mainly white folks with all the money, got nothing. And people,
and some of them got their CEO bonuses. which is insane.
Right, and early retirements.
Yeah.
When their company goes under, and yet there's still people locked up in the States for possession of marijuana for life.
Right, and then to be the land of the free and the home of the brave, don't we have more people in prison than they have in China? I mean, it's something like we have more people in jail in America than any other free country. It's just crazy.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's like 1 in 4, 1 in 4 and 5, 1 in 4 or 5. I can't remember the actual stat of behind bars.
Yeah, it's
a country.
Right.
It's a prison camp. Basically, the country is quarter of the population is locked behind bars. It's unacceptable, actually.
It really is. And so, but why? How did we get here? Well, because we see the way to solve these problems. Lock them up. Yeah, put them in jail. That's the only way to solve that problem. And it is, the color line is it's very true. Like, you see when a white person does something horrible and they get like 2 weeks in jail, and then a black person does something even less offensive, and then they get like 20 years. It's like, what? Why do we have this crazy system? It doesn't make any sense. So it doesn't take very much to see that we have a criminal justice system that is not fair. It is not blind. Justice is not blind in America. It definitely recognizes ethnicity, your poverty level, your income level. If you're rich, you're probably going to either get off completely, or you're going to get off with paying a fine. Or even if you do get sent to jail, you get sent to one of these country club prisons, or just get like an ankle bracelet where you basically live in your mansion all day. And it's just so it's really sick. So at every level, I just feel like, the criminal justice system in America is a huge, huge problem, and I do think it is tied to some of our theological assumptions.
Yeah, and I think it's tied to slavery. I think we just kicked slavery.
Yes, it is.
I think we kicked the slavery can down the road, and then we took away people's rights. So if we can lock black folks up, take away their rights, they don't get their constitutional rights, which is basically slavery, and we just changed the words.
Yeah,
we just changed the wording.
It's like a virus that changes form. You know how like these viruses mutate? Right. This is what it is. Yeah. This is literally what it is. It's because and I think we need, this is why I think at the political level, really believe in think tanks, because at the think tank level, even though you have a small group of people that are like, literally thinking and, having these conversations at a philosophical level, they influence public policy. Eventually, we have like that think tanks at the defense level, with military policy. But we do need, I honestly think that our political leaders, or we need to get political leaders, or our current political leaders, I don't care who, needs to start to at a think tank level, because people talk about, we don't know how to do it, we don't know how to reform the system, it's too big of a deal, and so people just give up, or they don't touch it. But like, let's start from getting back to our caller who said, what did it mean when Jesus said you'll do greater things? This is kind of what I think we're talking about here. Say, let's get to the root here. Let's start rethinking what criminality actually is. Let's start rethinking what the goal is. Is the goal punitive? Is the goal to protect society only? Or is the goal restorative? We need think tanks outside of the religious box. Because people are talking about this at certain circles, but we need our at the public policy level, people who are organizing. Look, we're going to have prisons. That's not going to go away. But we need to start rethinking what the purpose is at that level, and that's where I think we can see some real change in our country. But we need it.
Yeah, there you go. So we're going to carry this conversation on in our bonus round, but that's going to be reserved for our lovely, lovely Patreon supporters. Woo-hoo. So if you want to listen to more of this conversation, join us on patreon.com/heretic happy hour and bookmark our website so that you know when new episodes come out, and it's heretichappyhour.com.
That's right. And we have a Facebook group for everyone who is a Patreon supporter of the Heretic Happy Hour, and it's only for you. So if you are a Patreon supporter, even at the minimum level, which I think is like $2 a month, which is, come on, everybody should do that. And you get not only all that other great, cool, bonus, awesome stuff on the Patreon page, you get exclusive access to this Heretic Happy Hour podcast Facebook group where we continue these conversations. And I got to say, too, I know I said at the top, but I have a new book coming out. I'm excited about it. Check it out.
Yeah, and I think, guys, correct me if I'm wrong here, but are we on iTunes now?
I don't know.
Okay, I think we might be
Does anybody use that anymore?
iTunes. Yeah, well, I think you can listen to the podcast on iTunes.
Okay.
And we are a podcast on iTunes.
That's new, though. That new.
What?
That's
No,
new, right?
no. That's been around for a
What
little bit.
podcast?
No, so we can.
What's
the
a podcast?
podcast is not. We've been around for a while, but we're on iTunes now, so you can rate us and review us on iTunes. It really helps the podcast get visibility. So please do that if you haven't.
Right. If you do that, God will multiply the blessings. It'll be a seed of faith that God will then multiply into your life, and you'll be blessed.
Yes.
Yes. Greater things you will do by rating and reviewing.
Greater things.